There is one absurd lie that I think has stuck around longer than it should have. And it is definitely one of the most common stereotypes about the Middle Ages, so much so that most people believe this lie to be true without ever having been challenged on it. And that lie is that people in the Middle Ages thought the world was flat. In this video, I'm going to tell you why this lie was created and how it spread until everyone started believing it. Let's jump in. Hey there and welcome to my channel, where I bring you new videos every week on all aspects of the Middle Ages. If you like what you see here, please remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. So let's start by examining the lie itself. The lie is this: people in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. This lie is most likely to be found online these days, among funny memes and jokes about the Middle Ages, but it's also popular with anyone who wants to take a pop at religion or Christians. It is often used as an example of how the clergy were opposed to science and scientific thinking, because if you believe the earth is round, then obviously it can't be flat. It is also a lesson teachers used to love to use when they were teaching about the Middle Ages in class, since it's an easy, memorable way to summarize just how far medieval people were behind the times. If you want to hear the lie, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about ancient Romans, medieval Japanese, or Islamic scholars during the Middle Ages. Everyone thinks medieval people believed the earth was flat. So what's the truth? Well, let's start with what people actually believed. First off, it is important to realize that ancient Greeks as early as Pythagoras and Aristotle already knew that the earth was round, and there is no reason to think that this idea was lost in the Middle Ages. After all, the idea of a round earth didn't come from some obscure group of scientists in Greece. It came from simply looking up at ships disappearing over the horizon and realizing that the earth must be curved. That's pretty basic observation stuff. And while there were debates during the Middle Ages about the shape of the earth, those debates were never about whether the earth was flat. They were about whether the earth was made out of water or some other substance. For example, was it made out of crystal? Did it have a hole in the middle? Was it hollow? Questions like these show just how seriously people took the fact that the earth was round. The only time that anyone in the Middle Ages argued for a flat earth is the same time that the Greek astronomer Ptolemy argued for a flat earth, and that was in astronomical treatises that were written about how the universe worked. Ptolemy's ideas were not seen as particularly clever or innovative, but they did become very influential through the Arabic translations of his work, and so many astronomers in the Middle Ages based their work on Ptolemy's assumptions. However, even these people would still sometimes argue for a spherical earth. For example, in his very influential book, De Divisione, written in 731 AD, the English monk and scholar Bede writes that the earth is round. In fact, he describes the earth as being like a ball, in which case it would certainly be curved. He also argues that sailors can sail round the world, which again implies that the earth is a sphere. Later on, Thomas Aquinas, probably the most famous medieval theologian, argues in his Summa Theologica that the earth is indeed round. Again, Ito uses the argument that ships disappear hull first over the horizon, which shows that the earth must be curved. So it is clear that the vast majority of scholars in the Middle Ages had no problem accepting a round earth. They knew it was round and they knew it was curved. So why have so many people come to believe this absurd lie? Well, as with many things that have nothing to do with the actual Middle Ages, we can trace the origin of this particular lie back to the 1800s. As I said before, it was Washington Irving who first invented the notion of the flat earth in his popular biography of Christopher Columbus. Published in 1828, Irving's version of events goes something like this. When Columbus went to see the various kings of Europe, trying to get them to fund his voyage to Asia, he told them that he could reach the east by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean, because, the earth is round. However, everyone he spoke to, including the Pope, thought he was wrong. That's because everyone believed the earth was flat, and therefore you couldn't sail west and end up in the east. Only after the voyage proved Columbus right and disproved the flat earth theory, European scholars finally cast off their ignorance and realized that the earth was round. This is clearly a dramatic story, but unfortunately, it's 100% fabricated. There is absolutely zero evidence that anyone in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. But that did unstop writers like Draper and White in the mid-1800s from using Irving's invention as the basis for their own books attacking religion. In books like the American Cyclopedia and the Universal History, these authors repeated Irving's claim that medieval Europeans were ignorant flat earth, and they did this to argue that Christianity was antithetical to science and scientific thinking. that medieval clergy deliberately ignored evidence and suppressed scientific discoveries. Draper and White were writing during the height of the so-called science versus religion debate in Victorian-era England. This debate arose out of the growing conflict between what people believed in the Bible, what they were discovering about the natural world through scientific investigation. And this tension led some people to believe that science and religion were fundamentally opposed. And if you want a good guy versus bad guy story, well, it's pretty easy to paint the Catholic Church as the enemy of science. They had, after all, condemned Galileo for supporting heliocentrism, and they had banned the works of Darwin. So, to say that the clergy were ignorant flat earthers made perfect sense in the context of this debate. But that doesn't mean it was true, and in fact, it was the exact opposite of the truth. But this lie did what its inventors needed it to do. It allowed them to say that religion caused people to reject science and to imply that religious beliefs were inherently anti. And once this lie got out into the public consciousness, it became extremely hard to kill. That's because the lie served a secondary purpose. It reinforced the idea that the Middle Ages were a so-called Dark Age that was intellectually and scientifically dead. You see, during the Enlightenment, people started looking back on the Middle Ages as a period of intellectual stagnation and decline, and this idea only grew throughout the 1800s. By saying that medieval people were flat earthers, it reinforced the idea that people during the Middle Ages were stupid and ignorant. It also helped make the lie stick, because it flattered modern people's sense of intellectual superiority. How could anyone think the earth was flat? We know better. Of course, that's not true either, and it is quite possible that there were some people during the Middle Ages who didn't know that the earth was round. However, it's important to remember that there were hundreds of different cultures and societies during the Middle Ages, and most of these societies were pre-literate. Some cultures were sophisticated and urban, others were nomadic and rural, so it makes no sense to suggest that everyone in such a diverse set of cultures all believed the same thing. Medieval people were not all flat earthers, but it is easier to teach that they were than to teach the truth. And that's the real problem with this lie. It's easy to repeat, it's easy to believe, but it's deeply misleading. We tend to forget that the Middle Ages were not a monolithic block of time. There was tremendous change and innovation during this period, and people's ideas changed along with it. For example, it was during the Middle Ages that universities were born. It was during the Middle Ages that the scientific method began to develop. It was during the Middle Ages that people like Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon explored the properties of light and optics. It was during the Middle Ages that mechanical clocks were invented and built. It was during the Middle Ages that the foundations for modern philosophy were laid by thinkers like Duns Scotus and William of Ockham. It was during the Middle Ages that engineers designed and built cathedrals that remain standing to this day. There is so much we could talk about. The Middle Ages were not a dark age, were not a stupid age. They were complex, they were vibrant, and they were full of incredibly smart, creative and curious people. So why does this lie matter? It matters because our understanding of history shapes how we understand the present. It is easy to look at the past and find confirmation for whatever ideas we already hold to be true. For example, if you think religion is bad, it is easy to look at the Middle Ages and point to all of the violence and persecution and oppression that happened during this time. And that's a legitimate critique. But doing that alone gives us a very incomplete picture of the past. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the various myths and misconceptions we have about the Middle Ages. To believe that people in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat is one of those myths. It's a myth that has no basis in reality, but it's one that has done a lot of damage. I hope that after watching this video, you will all be able to share the truth with others and challenge this absurd lie whenever you hear it. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can follow me on social media, or you can visit my website. Thanks for watching.